They called it an auction, but Eliza Rowan knew what it really was: a sale. At 18, she stood on a splintered platform in Black Hollow, while men with cold eyes and cruel smiles circled below, weighing her worth like livestock. Her father's debts had stripped everything away, and now she was the final payment. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the dust, and she braced for the highest bidder to claim her. Then a tall rancher in a worn hat raised his hand, and her life changed forever. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it grabs you, hit that like button and stay until the end. You won't regret it. The sun beat down on Black Hollow like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dirt streets into rivers of choking dust. Eliza Rowan stood on the wooden platform in the center of town, her hands clenched so tightly at her sides that her nails bit into her palms. She didn't dare look at the faces in the crowd, didn't want to see the hunger, the calculation, the cold assessment in their eyes. She was 18 years old, and she was being sold. The auctioneer, a barrel-chested man with a voice like gravel scraped across iron, gestured toward her with one thick hand. "Fine young woman here, gentlemen. Strong, healthy, good breeding stock. Her father owed more than he could pay, and this here's the settlement. Do I hear an opening bid?" Eliza's stomach twisted. The words were polite enough on the surface, but underneath they were raw and ugly. She wasn't a person to these men. She was property, a transaction, a solution to someone else's problem. $50, a voice called from the back, and a wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. "50? Hell, I wouldn't pay 50 for a lame mule," another man shouted, and more laughter followed. Eliza kept her chin up, her jaw locked tight. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She'd cried enough in the days leading up to this, cried when the bank had seized her father's house, cried when the creditors had dragged away every piece of furniture, every scrap of cloth, every memory she'd ever known. There were no tears left now, only a cold, hard knot of rage and shame that sat like a stone in her chest. "75, someone else called, and the auctioneer's grin widened. "Now we're talking. $75. Do I hear 80? 80! A man near the front raised his hand, and Eliza's gaze flickered toward him despite herself. He was broad-shouldered and red-faced, with a tobacco-stained beard and eyes that made her skin crawl. She'd seen men like him before, men who took what they wanted and didn't care who got hurt in the process. $80 from Mr. Crenshaw. Do I hear 90? 90! Another voice, this one younger, sharper. The bidding climbed higher, and Eliza felt herself shrinking inward, retreating to some small, protected place deep inside where the words couldn't reach her. She focused on the horizon, on the distant line of mountains that rose like jagged teeth against the pale sky. Somewhere beyond those peaks was a different world, a place where girls weren't auctioned off like cattle, where debts didn't devour entire lives. But that world wasn't hers. This was. $100! The red-faced man, Crenshaw, bellowed the number like a challenge, and the crowd went quiet for a moment. $100 was serious money, more than most men in Black Hollow made in 3 months. The auctioneer's eyes gleamed. $100 from Mr. Crenshaw. Going once? 200. The voice cut through the air like a blade, low and steady and utterly calm. Every head in the crowd turned, and Eliza's gaze followed. A man stood at the edge of the platform, tall and lean, with a broad-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. He didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the sudden rush of whispers and mutters. He just stood there, solid as a fence post, waiting. The auctioneer blinked, clearly caught off guard. $200? Did I hear that right, Mr. Mercer? You did. Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. $200. That was more than double Crenshaw's bid. It was a fortune. Crenshaw's face went purple. 210. 300. The tall man, Mercer, didn't raise his voice, didn't even shift his weight. He just said the number like it was the simplest thing in the world. The crowd erupted. Men shouted, cursed, demanded to know where a broke rancher like Wade Mercer had gotten that kind of money, but Mercer didn't respond. He just stood there, calm and unmoving, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. Crenshaw sputtered, his face turning an even deeper shade of red. 320. 500. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the auctioneer seemed stunned, his mouth hanging open as he stared at Mercer. $500, he finally managed. Going once, going twice, no one else spoke. No one dared. Sold to Mr. Wade Mercer for $500. Eliza's knees nearly buckled. $500. She didn't understand it. Didn't understand why anyone would pay that much, or what it meant, or what kind of man would throw away a fortune on a girl he'd never even looked at. The crowd began to disperse, grumbling and muttering, and Mercer stepped forward. For the first time, Eliza saw his face clearly. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 35, maybe 40, with lines etched deep around his eyes and a weathered, sun-darkened face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, and his expression was unreadable, carved from stone. He didn't smile, didn't offer her a hand. He just nodded once, a brief, almost imperceptible gesture, and turned toward a wagon waiting at the edge of the square. "Let's go," he said, his voice rough and low. Eliza hesitated, her legs suddenly unsteady. This was it. This was the moment her life changed, whether she wanted it to or not. She followed him. The wagon rattled over the rough dirt road, every jolt sending a shudder through Eliza's bones. She sat on the hard wooden bench beside Mercer, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. He hadn't spoken since they'd left town, and she didn't know what to say. Didn't know if she was supposed to thank him or ask him questions or just sit in silence and wait for whatever came next. The landscape around them was harsh and unforgiving. Rolling hills covered in dry grass, scattered patches of scrub oak and juniper, and endless stretches of empty sky. There were no other houses, no signs of life except for the occasional hawk circling overhead. "How far is it?" Eliza finally asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Another hour," Mercer replied without looking at her. "And then what?" He was quiet for a moment, and she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Then you work." The words hit her like a slap, sharp and cold. Of course, she should have known. $500 wasn't charity. It was an investment. He'd bought her labor, her time, her obedience, just like every other man in that crowd had wanted to. "What kind of work?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Cooking, cleaning, looking after the children." Eliza's head snapped toward him. "Children?" "2 of them, twins, 9 years old." She stared at him, her mind reeling. She'd expected a lot of things, hard labor, long hours, maybe worse, but not children. "What happened to their mother?" she asked before she could stop herself. Mercer's jaw tightened, and for the first time she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or anger. It was gone before she could be sure. "She's dead," he said flatly, and that was the end of the conversation. They rode the rest of the way in silence. But the Mercer Ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its slow descent toward the mountains. It wasn't much. A small, weathered house with a sagging porch, a barn that had seen better days, and a few scattered outbuildings. A wooden fence enclosed a patch of land where a handful of cattle grazed, and beyond that, the wilderness stretched out in every direction, wild and untamed. Mercer pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down without a word. Eliza followed, her legs stiff and aching from the long ride. She looked around, taking in the peeling paint, the crooked shutters, the weeds growing up through the porch boards. It was a hard place, a lonely place, and she felt a sharp pang of fear settle in her chest. "Inside," Mercer said, nodding toward the door. She hesitated, then stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under her weight, and the door swung open with a groan. The interior of the house was dim and cluttered. A layer of dust covered every surface, and the smell of old smoke and stale air hung heavy in the room. A rough wooden table sat in the center of the main room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. A cold fireplace took up one wall, and a narrow staircase led up to a second floor. And standing at the base of that staircase, staring at her with identical expressions of suspicion and hostility, were 2 children. The girl was small and wiry, with tangled dark hair and sharp green eyes that seemed to see straight through Eliza. The boy was taller, broader, with the same dark hair and the same piercing gaze. They didn't say a word, didn't move, just watched her like a pair of feral cats sizing up a threat. "Ivy, Cole," Mercer's voice was flat. "This is Eliza. She's here to help." The girl, Ivy, crossed her arms over her chest. "We don't need help." "Yeah." The boy, Cole echoed. We don't need nobody. Eliza swallowed hard. She'd dealt with difficult children before, back when she'd helped her neighbors with their little ones, but these two were different. There was something raw and wounded in their eyes, something that made her heart ache even as her stomach twisted with anxiety. Well, she said, forcing her voice to stay calm, I'm here now, so we might as well make the best of it. Ivy's lip curled. We'll see about that. And then with that, both children turned and bolted up the stairs, their footsteps thundering overhead. Mercer sighed, a deep, weary sound. Welcome to the Mercer Ranch, he said dryly, and walked out the door, leaving Eliza alone in the dusty, silent house. The first night was a disaster. Eliza found the kitchen, a cramped, cluttered space at the back of the house, and set about trying to make something resembling a meal. The stove was ancient and temperamental, the cupboards were nearly bare, and the few ingredients she did find were stale or half-spoiled. But she managed to cobble together a pot of beans and a pan of cornbread, and when the sun set, she called the children down for supper. They came, but only after she'd called 3 times, and they sat at the table with their arms crossed and their mouths set in identical scowls. Mercer didn't join them. He'd disappeared into the barn shortly after they'd arrived, and she hadn't seen him since. Eat, Eliza said, ladling beans onto their plates. Ivy wrinkled her nose. Looks like slop. Yeah, Cole agreed. We ain't pigs. Eliza took a deep breath and counted to 10. It's food, and you'll eat it, or you'll go to bed hungry. Ivy's eyes flashed. You ain't our ma. You can't tell us what to do. I'm not trying to be your ma, Eliza said evenly, but I am trying to keep you fed. So eat. For a long, tense moment, they just stared at each other. Then, to Eliza's surprise, Cole picked up his spoon and took a small, reluctant bite. Ivy shot him a glare, but after a moment she did the same. They ate in silence, and when they were done, they bolted from the table without a word. Eliza sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the dirty dishes, and wondered what on earth she'd gotten herself into. The next few days followed the same pattern. Eliza woke before dawn, lit the stove, and made breakfast. The children ignored her, or mocked her, or outright defied her. Mercer barely spoke, spending most of his time outside tending to the cattle or repairing fences or doing whatever it was that kept him away from the house. Eliza scrubbed floors, washed dishes, mended clothes, and cooked meals that no one seemed to appreciate. She tried to talk to the twins, tried to coax them into conversation, but they shut her out at every turn. One morning, she found a dead mouse in her bed. Another day, her shoes went missing, and she found them hours later buried in the chicken coop. The twins watched her with smug, satisfied grins, waiting for her to snap, to yell, to give up, and leave. But Eliza didn't snap. She didn't yell. She just kept working. She'd been through worse. She'd been sold like a piece of furniture, dragged away from everything she'd ever known, and dumped in the middle of nowhere with a man who didn't talk and children who hated her. A few pranks weren't going to break her. Still, it was hard. Harder than she'd imagined. One evening, as she was washing dishes, Mercer came into the kitchen. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, and then he said, "They're testing you." Eliza didn't turn around. "I know. They've chased off 3 housekeepers in the last year." "I'm not a housekeeper." "No," Mercer said quietly. "I suppose you're not." There was a long pause, and then he added, "Their mother died 2 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. They've been angry ever since." Eliza's hands stilled in the soapy water. She turned to look at him, and for the first time she saw the grief etched into his face, raw and unhealed. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Mercer nodded once, then turned and walked out. It was a week before Eliza saw any sign of progress. She was sitting on the porch one evening, mending a torn shirt, when Ivy appeared in the doorway. The girl didn't say anything, just stood there, watching. "Need something?" Eliza asked without looking up. Ivy shrugged. "Just wondering what you're doing." "Mending your brother's shirt. He tore it on the fence." "He's always tearing things," Ivy said, and there was the faintest hint of a smile in her voice. Eliza glanced up. "You could help, if you wanted. I could teach you." Ivy's expression shuddered immediately. "I don't need you to teach me nothing." Suit yourself, Eliza said mildly, and went back to her stitching. Ivy lingered for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared back into the house. It wasn't much, but it was something. The real breakthrough came a few days later when Cole got sick. It started with a cough, a dry, hacking sound that rattled through the house in the middle of the night. By morning, he was feverish and weak, barely able to lift his head from the pillow. Ivy was terrified. She hovered at her brother's bedside, her eyes wide and scared, and for the first time since Eliza had arrived, the mask of defiance slipped. "Is he going to die?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Eliza said firmly, though her own heart was pounding. "He's not going to die, but we need to keep him cool and get some fluids into him." She spent the next 2 days nursing Cole, sponging his forehead with cool water, coaxing him to drink broth, sitting by his bedside through the long, dark hours of the night. Ivy stayed close, silent and watchful, and Mercer checked in every few hours, his face tight with worry. On the third day, the fever broke. Cole's eyes fluttered open, clear and focused, and he managed a weak smile. "You're still here," he murmured. "Of course I am," Eliza said, brushing the damp hair back from his forehead. "Where else would I be?" Ivy, sitting on the other side of the bed, let out a shaky breath. And then, to Eliza's shock, the girl reached out and took her hand. "Thank you," Ivy said quietly. Eliza squeezed her hand. "You're welcome." When Mercer came in later that evening and saw the three of them, Eliza sitting between the twins, all three of them half asleep, he stopped in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something that looked almost like hope. After that, things began to change. The pranks didn't stop entirely, but they became less frequent, less vicious. The twins still tested her, still pushed back, but there was a wariness in their eyes now, a grudging respect. Eliza kept working. She cooked, cleaned, mended, and slowly, bit by bit, she began to carve out a place for herself in the house. She learned that Ivy loved stories and would sit for hours listening to tales of far-off places and daring adventures. She discovered that Cole had a gift for fixing things, and she started asking for his help with broken tools and furniture, which he grudgingly provided. And Mercer. Mercer was harder to read. He still didn't talk much, but he watched her. She could feel his eyes on her when she worked in the kitchen, when she sat on the porch in the evenings, when she played with the children in the yard. He never said anything, never moved closer, but she knew he was there. One night, as she was putting the twins to bed, Ivy looked up at her and said, "You're not like the others." "What others?" Eliza asked. "The other ladies Pa brought here. They didn't stay. They didn't like us." "Well," Eliza said, tucking the blanket around her, "I like you just fine." Ivy smiled, a real, genuine smile, and Eliza felt something warm and fragile unfurl in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this place could become home. The first real snow came in late November, sweeping down from the mountains in a howling white curtain that buried the ranch under 2 feet of powder. Eliza had never seen snow like this. Back in Black Hollow, winter had been mild, a few dustings at most. But here, on the edge of the frontier, winter was a beast. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of the wind. The windows rattled in their frames, and the cold seeped in through every crack and gap. Eliza kept the fire roaring day and night, burning through their supply of wood at an alarming rate. Mercer worked himself to exhaustion, hauling firewood, checking on the cattle, making sure the barn was secure. He came in each night half frozen, his face red and raw from the wind, and Eliza would pour him hot coffee and insist he sit by the fire until he thawed. He never complained, never asked for anything, but she saw the weariness in his eyes, the weight of responsibility that pressed down on his shoulders, and she wished she could do more to help. The twins, for their part, seemed almost gleeful about the snow. They spent hours outside building forts and throwing snowballs, their laughter ringing out across the frozen landscape. It was the first time Eliza had seen them truly happy, and it filled her with a fierce, protective joy. But the joy didn't last. One night, as they sat around the fire after supper, Ivy began to cough. It was a small sound at first, barely noticeable, but by the next morning, it had grown into a deep, rattling hack that shook her whole body. Eliza's heart sank, and when Cole started coughing the following day, she knew they were in trouble. The fever came fast and hard, burning through both children like wildfire. By the third day, they were both bedridden, their skin flushed and hot to the touch, their breathing labored and uneven. Eliza didn't sleep. She moved between the two beds, sponging foreheads, changing sweat-soaked sheets, coaxing water and broth past their cracked lips. Her hands shook with exhaustion, her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she didn't stop. Mercer was a ghost in the house, pacing the floors, his face pale and haunted. He'd lost his wife to fever, and now he was watching his children slip away, and there was nothing he could do. "We need a doctor," Eliza said on the fourth night, her voice hoarse. "Can't get one," Mercer said flatly. "Roads are snowed in. No one's getting through." Eliza's chest tightened. "Then we do this ourselves." Mercer looked at her, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. Raw, naked fear. "I can't lose them," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't." Eliza crossed the room and took his hand. His fingers were cold and rough, calloused from years of hard work, and she held them tightly. "You won't," she said fiercely. "We won't. We're going to fight for them, Wade, every minute, every hour. We're going to bring them through this." He stared at her, and then he nodded. Together, they worked through the night. They kept the fires burning, kept the children cool, kept fluids moving into their small, fragile bodies. Mercer held Cole while Eliza tended to Ivy, and then they switched, each taking turns so the other could rest for a few precious minutes. The hours blurred together, a haze of fear and exhaustion and desperate, stubborn hope. And then, just before dawn, Ivy's fever broke. Eliza felt it happen, felt the heat recede from the girl's skin, felt her breathing ease. She let out a sob of relief and pressed her forehead against Ivy's small hand. "She's going to be okay," she whispered. An hour later, Cole's fever broke too. Mercer collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, and Eliza saw his shoulders shake. She crossed the room and knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him, and he clung to her like a drowning man. "Thank you," he said, his voice raw. "Thank you." Eliza didn't answer. She just held him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt like she belonged. The days after the fever were quiet, in a way that felt almost sacred. Ivy and Cole moved through the house like shadows, weak and unsteady on their feet, but alive. Eliza watched them with a fierce protectiveness she hadn't known she possessed, her heart catching every time one of them stumbled or coughed. Wade hovered nearby, closer than he'd ever been before. His presence a silent reassurance that they were all still tethered to each other, still breathing, still here. The fear hadn't left him. Eliza could see it in the way his jaw tightened whenever the twins coughed, in the way his eyes followed them around the room, as if he was afraid they might disappear if he looked away. She understood it. She'd felt the same terror during those long, dark hours when the fever had raged and nothing she did seemed enough. But they'd survived. All of them. On the fifth day after the fever broke, Ivy shuffled into the kitchen where Eliza was kneading bread dough. The girl's face was still pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but there was a spark of determination in her expression that Eliza recognized all too well. "I want to help," Ivy said, her voice hoarse but firm. Eliza glanced up, flour dusting her hands and forearms. "You should be resting." "I'm tired of resting." Ivy crossed her arms, a gesture so familiar it made Eliza's chest ache. "I want to do something." Eliza studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the table. "All right. You can help me roll out the dough, but if you start feeling dizzy or weak, you tell me right away. Deal?" Ivy's face lit up. "Deal." They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of dough against wood and the crackle of the fire in the stove. Eliza showed Ivy how to shape the loaves, how to pinch the edges just right so they wouldn't split in the oven. The girl's hands were small and clumsy at first, but she learned quickly, her brow furrowed in concentration. "My ma used to make bread," Ivy said suddenly, her voice quiet. Eliza's hand stilled for just a moment before she continued working. "Did she?" "Yeah, she made it every week, always smelled so good." Ivy's voice wavered and she pressed her lips together. "I tried to make it after she died, but it came out all wrong, hard as a rock. Cole said we could use it for target practice." Eliza smiled softly. "Bread can be tricky, takes practice." "I don't remember how she did it," Ivy whispered. And there was such raw grief in those words that Eliza had to swallow hard against the lump in her throat. She set down the dough and wiped her hands on her apron, then turned to face Ivy fully. You want to know something? I didn't know how to make bread either when I first started. Burned the first 3 loaves so bad they were black as coal. My father said they could have been used as bricks. Ivy looked up, her eyes wide. Really? Really? But I kept trying, and eventually I figured it out. Eliza reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind Ivy's ear. Your ma would be proud of you for trying, and she'd be proud of how strong you've been. Ivy's eyes filled with tears, and she ducked her head quickly, swiping at her face with the back of her hand. I miss her. I know, Eliza said softly. I know you do. For a long moment, they just stood there, and then Ivy stepped forward and wrapped her thin arms around Eliza's waist, burying her face against her shoulder. Eliza held her tightly, one hand stroking her hair, and felt something shift deep inside her chest. This wasn't just duty anymore. This wasn't just survival. This was something far more fragile and far more precious. This was love. When Ivy finally pulled back, her cheeks were wet, but she was smiling. Can we finish the bread now? Absolutely, Eliza said, her own voice thick with emotion. Let's finish the bread, Dustin. Cole took longer to warm up, but Eliza could see the cracks forming in his armor. He still tested her, still challenged her, but there was less venom in it now. More curiosity. He watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, his dark eyes tracking her movements as she worked around the house. One afternoon, she found him sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the snow-covered landscape with a piece of wood and a small knife in his hands. He was carving something, his movements slow and deliberate. What are you making? Eliza asked, settling down beside him. He shrugged. Don't know yet, just carving. She watched as he worked, the blade peeling away thin curls of wood that fell onto the step between his boots. His hands were steady despite his recent illness, and there was a kind of quiet focus in his expression that reminded her of Wade. You're good at that, she said. Cole glanced at her, suspicious. You don't have to say that. I'm not just saying it. You're good. Where'd you learn? My pa taught me. His voice softened just a fraction. Before Ma died, he used to carve things all the time. Little animals and stuff. He hasn't done it in a long time, though. Eliza felt a pang of sadness. Maybe he just needs a reason to start again. Cole didn't answer, but his hand stilled on the wood for a moment before he resumed carving. They sat together in silence, the cold air biting at their cheeks, and Eliza didn't push. She'd learned that with these children, silence was sometimes more powerful than words. After a while, Cole said, You really gonna stay? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? The other ladies didn't stay. They left as soon as they could. He kept his eyes on the wood, his voice carefully neutral. Figured you'd leave too once you got tired of us. Eliza's heart twisted. I'm not going anywhere, Cole. You say that now? I mean it. She turned to face him fully, waiting until he finally looked up and met her gaze. I know you and Ivy have been through a lot. I know you're scared to trust me, but I'm not leaving. This is my home now, and you're my family, whether you like it or not. Cole's eyes searched hers, looking for the lie, the weakness, the crack that would prove she was just like all the others. But whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded slowly and went back to his carving. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. And Wade noticed the change in the twins, and it seemed to unsettle him as much as it relieved him. Eliza caught him watching them sometimes, his expression a mixture of wonder and wariness, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. The children who'd been feral and angry for 2 years were slowly, carefully opening up, and he didn't seem to know what to do with that. He still didn't talk much, but he started staying inside more in the evenings, sitting by the fire while Eliza read to the children or helped them with small projects. He never interrupted, never joined in, but his presence was a solid, grounding weight in the room. One night, after the twins had gone to bed, Eliza found Wade standing at the kitchen window, staring out into the darkness. The snow had finally stopped falling, and the world outside was still and silent, blanketed in white. They're doing better, she said softly, coming to stand beside him. He nodded. Because of you. Because we all fought for it, she corrected. You didn't give up on them. That matters. Wade was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, I didn't know what to do. After Sarah died, I didn't know how to be what they needed. I tried, but everything I did seemed to make it worse. Eliza heard the pain in his voice, the guilt that had been eating at him for 2 years. You kept them alive. You kept this ranch running. That's not nothing, Wade. It wasn't enough. Maybe not. She turned to look at him, and his eyes finally met hers. But it's enough now. We're enough now. Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or hope. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with words neither of them knew how to speak. Finally, Wade said, I paid $500 for you. Eliza's breath caught. She'd tried not to think about that day in Black Hollow, tried not to dwell on the fact that she'd been bought and sold like livestock. But hearing him say it out loud brought it all rushing back. The shame, the fear, the cold certainty that she was nothing more than a transaction. I know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't do it because I needed a housekeeper. Wade's jaw tightened, and he looked away. I did it because I saw the men in that crowd, saw the way they were looking at you, and I knew what would happen if one of them got you. Eliza's heart pounded. So you bought me to save me. I bought you because I couldn't stand by and let that happen. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I didn't have a plan. Didn't think it through. I couldn't let them take you. The honesty in his words hit her like a physical blow. She'd assumed he'd bought her out of practicality, out of need. The idea that he'd done it to protect her, to save her from something worse, was almost too much to process. Thank you, she said finally, her voice shaking. Wade shook his head. You don't have to thank me. You've more than earned your place here. The work you've done, the way you've been with the kids. You don't owe me anything. Then what am I to you? The question came out before she could stop it, raw and desperate. Am I still just property? A debt to be worked off? Wade's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with shock. No, hell no. He broke off, struggling for words. You're the reason this house feels like a home again. You're the reason my kids are laughing instead of crying. He stopped again, his jaw working. You're not property, Eliza. You never were. The intensity in his voice made her chest ache. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself feel the warmth of those words, but fear held her back. She'd trusted before, and it had led her to an auction block. She wasn't sure she could survive that kind of betrayal again. I need to know, she said quietly. If things change, if you decide you don't want me here anymore, will you send me away? No. The word was immediate and absolute. I won't. This is your home, Eliza, for as long as you want it to be. She searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt, any hint that he was just saying what she wanted to hear, but all she saw was honesty, raw and unguarded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Winter deepened, and the world outside became a frozen wasteland of ice and snow. The work on the ranch was relentless, hauling water that froze in the buckets before it could reach the barn, chopping firewood until her arms ached, keeping the animals fed and sheltered. Eliza had never worked so hard in her life, but she found a strange satisfaction in it. Every task completed was proof that she was needed, that she belonged. The twins grew stronger with each passing day, their laughter returning like the first birds of spring. Ivy started helping Eliza with the cooking and cleaning, her small hands quick and capable. Cole took over some of the outdoor chores, working alongside Wade to repair fences and tend to the cattle. The change in them was remarkable, and Eliza felt a fierce pride every time she watched them tackle a new challenge. But the real transformation was in Wade. The walls he'd built around himself were crumbling, piece by piece, and Eliza could see the man he'd been before grief had hollowed him out. He smiled more, talked more, let himself be present in a way he hadn't been when she first arrived. One evening, as they were all gathered around the fire, Ivy looked up from the sock she was mending and said, "Eliza, will you tell us a story?" Eliza glanced at Wade, who was sitting in his chair with Cole at his feet, whittling a piece of wood. He nodded slightly, and she smiled. "All right, what kind of story do you want?" "A scary one," Cole said immediately. Ivy rolled her eyes. No, a romantic one. How about both? Eliza suggested, and both children perked up. She launched into a tale about a brave young woman who ventured into a haunted forest to save her true love from a witch's curse. She made her voice dramatic and suspenseful, lowering it to a whisper for the scary parts and lifting it with warmth for the romantic moments. The twins hung on her every word, their eyes wide and shining in the firelight. Even Wade seemed captivated, his hands stilling on the wood as he listened. When Eliza finished, describing how the young woman broke the curse with a kiss and led her love out of the forest into the light, Ivy sighed dreamily. That was perfect, she said. Cole grinned. The witch part was the best. Wade chuckled, a low, warm sound that Eliza felt all the way to her toes. I think Eliza did a fine job with both parts. Eliza flushed under his gaze, her heart doing an odd little flip in her chest. Thank you. The moment stretched between them, charged with something she couldn't quite name, and then Ivy yawned loudly, breaking the spell. Time for bed, Wade said, standing. Both of you. The twins groaned but didn't argue, and Eliza watched as they trudged up the stairs, their footsteps heavy with exhaustion. Wade followed them up to tuck them in, and Eliza was left alone by the fire, her thoughts swirling. She was starting to feel things she had no right to feel, things that were dangerous and foolish and utterly inevitable. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and routine, but beneath the surface, something was shifting. Eliza caught Wade watching her more often, his gaze lingering on her face, her hands, the way she moved through the house. She tried to ignore it, tried to tell herself it didn't mean anything, but it was becoming harder and harder to pretend. One afternoon, she was in the barn, struggling to lift a heavy sack of feed, when Wade appeared at her side. Let me, he said, taking the sack from her hands before she could protest. He hoisted it onto his shoulder with ease and carried it to the storage area, and Eliza followed, her cheeks warm despite the cold. You don't have to do everything yourself, Wade said, dusting off his hands. Neither do you, she shot back. He smiled, a real genuine smile that made her stomach flutter. Stubborn, says the man who refuses to ask for help with anything. Touché. He leaned against the wall, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You've changed this place, you know, changed all of us. Eliza's breath caught. I've just been trying to pull my weight. You've done a hell of a lot more than that. His voice was soft, almost reverent. The kids, they're happy again. I didn't think that was possible. They just needed someone who wouldn't give up on them, Eliza said. So did I. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Eliza's heart pounded. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that she felt the same way, that she couldn't imagine being anywhere else, that the thought of leaving this place, leaving him, was unbearable. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with fear and doubt. Before she could find her voice, Cole's shout echoed from outside. Pa! One of the calves is stuck in the fence. Wade straightened immediately, the moment broken. Coming! He glanced at Eliza, something unspoken flickering in his eyes, and then he was gone. Eliza stood alone in the barn, her hands trembling, and wondered how much longer she could keep pretending that her heart wasn't already his. The incident with the calf turned out to be minor. The young animal had gotten its head wedged between two fence posts and panicked, but Wade and Cole were able to free it without injury. Still, it served as a reminder of how fragile everything was, how quickly things could go wrong. That night, as Eliza was cleaning up after supper, Ivy came into the kitchen and climbed onto one of the chairs, watching her with serious eyes. Can I ask you something? Ivy said. Of course. Do you like it here? Really? Eliza paused, setting down the dish she'd been washing. Yes, I really do. Even though you didn't choose to come here? The question was perceptive, cutting straight to the heart of things. Eliza dried her hands on her apron and sat down across from Ivy. You're right. I didn't choose to come here, but I'm choosing to stay. Every single day I'm choosing this, choosing you and Cole and your father, choosing this life. Ivy's eyes glistened. What if something bad happens? What if you have to leave? I won't leave, Eliza said firmly, not unless you want me to. We don't, Ivy said quickly, fiercely. We don't want you to leave, ever. Eliza reached across the table and took Ivy's small hand in hers. Then I won't. I promise. Ivy squeezed her hand tightly, and for a moment they just sat there, bound together by something stronger than blood. February brought a brief thaw, the snow melting into muddy slush that turned the yard into a swamp. It was messy and inconvenient, but it also meant that spring was coming, that the worst of winter was behind them. Wade took advantage of the warmer weather to start repairing the damage the storms had caused. Broken fence posts, a sagging section of the barn roof, a dozen other small tasks that had been put off during the coldest months. Eliza helped where she could, holding tools and handing him nails, and they worked in companionable silence. One afternoon, as they were mending a section of fence near the house, Wade suddenly said, "I was married for 8 years." Eliza looked up, startled. He'd never talked about his wife before, not really, and she'd been careful not to push. She was everything, Wade continued, his voice rough. Smart, kind, strong. She could outwork any man on this ranch and still have energy left to tell the kids bedtime stories. He hammered in a nail with more force than necessary. When she got sick, I thought it was just a cold, nothing serious. And then she was gone, and I didn't know how to keep breathing. Eliza set down the hammer she'd been holding. "I'm sorry, Wade. I blamed myself for a long time. Thought maybe if I'd gotten a doctor sooner, if I'd done something different, she might have lived." He shook his head. "The kids blamed me too. I could see it in their eyes." "They were just hurting," Eliza said gently. "Kids don't know how to handle that kind of pain. They lash out." "I know, but it didn't make it any easier." He looked at her, his eyes shadowed. "I shut down after she died. Stopped talking, stopped feeling, just went through the motions. And the kids, they needed me. And I wasn't there." "You were surviving," Eliza said. "That's all any of us can do sometimes." Wade was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You brought us back, all of us. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't have to thank me," Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is my family now. You don't thank family." Something shifted in Wade's expression, and for a moment Eliza thought he might say something more, something that would change everything between them. But then Cole came running up, breathless and excited, and the moment was lost. "Pa! Eliza! Come quick! There's a mama deer with a fawn down by the creek." They followed him, and the rest of the afternoon was spent watching the deer from a distance, the twins whispering in awe at the sight of the tiny spotted fawn on its wobbly legs. It was a perfect moment, pure and simple, and Eliza tucked it away in her heart to treasure later. As winter gave way to early spring, the dynamics of the household continued to shift. The twins no longer treated Eliza like an outsider. She was part of the fabric of their lives now, woven in so tightly that it was hard to remember a time when she hadn't been there. But with that acceptance came a new kind of vulnerability. Eliza had built walls around her own heart, walls designed to protect her from the pain of abandonment and loss. And now those walls were crumbling, leaving her exposed and terrified. She was falling in love with Wade Mercer. She could deny it all she wanted, but the truth was undeniable. She loved the quiet strength in him, the way he put his children first, the rare smiles that transformed his stern face into something beautiful. She loved the way he looked at her sometimes, as if she was something precious and unexpected, and she had no idea what to do about it. One night, unable to sleep, Eliza slipped out of bed and went downstairs. She found Wade sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hands, staring into the darkness beyond the window. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. He looked up, surprised. "Too much on my mind." She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. "Want to talk about it?" Wade was silent for a long moment, and then he said, "I keep thinking about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "Winter's almost over. Spring means planting, calving season, 1,000 things that need doing." He paused. "It also means we can get into town again. And I keep thinking, what if you decide you want to leave? What if you realize there's a better life out there for you?" Eliza's heart clenched. "Wade, I told you. I know what you told me. But you didn't choose this. You were forced into it. And now that you've had time to think, to see what else is out there." He trailed off, his knuckles white around the coffee cup. Eliza reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "I'm not leaving. I don't want a different life. I want this one. Wade's eyes met hers, searching for the truth. Why? Because this is where I belong. The words came out fierce and certain. Because those kids upstairs are the best thing that's ever happened to me. Because this ranch, this life, this family, it's mine. And I'm not giving it up. And me? Wade's voice was barely a whisper. What about me? Eliza's breath caught. This was it. The moment everything changed. You, she said softly, are the reason I stopped feeling like I was just surviving and started feeling like I was living. Wade stood abruptly, pulling her to her feet, and for a heartbeat, they just stood there, inches apart, the air between them crackling with tension. Then he cupped her face in his rough, calloused hands and kissed her. It was gentle and desperate all at once, a confession and a question and an answer all wrapped together. Eliza melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, utterly safe. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said, the words rough and raw. I didn't mean to. Didn't think I could. But I do. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. They stood there in the dark kitchen, holding each other, and the broken pieces of their lives finally began to feel whole. The morning after the kiss, Eliza woke before dawn with her heart still racing. She lay in bed, staring at the rough wooden beams of the ceiling, and replayed every moment in her mind. The way Wade's hands had trembled when he touched her face, the rawness in his voice when he'd said he loved her, the feeling of complete rightness that had settled over her like a warm blanket. She'd spent 18 years believing she was unwanted, unworthy of anything beyond survival. And now she had this. A man who looked at her like she hung the moon, children who needed her, a home that felt more real than anything she'd ever known. It terrified her. She dressed quickly and headed downstairs, her feet quiet on the worn steps. The kitchen was still dark, but she could see the faint glow of the stove where Wade had already started the fire. He was standing by the window, his back to her, his shoulders tense beneath his faded shirt. Morning, she said softly. He turned, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. There was hope there, and fear, and a vulnerability she'd never seen before. Morning. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. I wasn't sure if last night was real, or if I dreamed it. Eliza crossed the room and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. It was real. Wade let out a shaky breath and pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. They stood like that for a long moment, neither of them speaking, just holding each other in the dim light of early morning. I don't know how to do this, Wade said finally. It's been so long since I let myself feel anything. I'm not sure I remember how. Then we'll figure it out together, Eliza said, her cheek pressed against his chest. No one's asking you to have all the answers, Wade. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and she felt the tension in his body ease just slightly. The kids don't know about us. I know. They might not be ready for this. Eliza pulled back to look at him. Or they might surprise you. They've come so far already. Wade's jaw tightened. Sarah's only been gone 2 years. What if they think I'm trying to replace her? You're not replacing anyone, Eliza said firmly, and they're smart enough to know that. But if you're worried, we can wait. Take our time. Let them adjust to the idea. Relief flickered across his face. You wouldn't mind? Wade, I've waited my whole life to feel like I belong somewhere. I can wait a little longer to make this official. She reached up and cupped his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. I'm not going anywhere. He kissed her again, slow and sweet, and when they finally broke apart, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the kitchen in shades of gold and amber. The sound of small feet thundering down the stairs made them spring apart, and a moment later, Cole burst into the kitchen, his hair sticking up in every direction. I'm starving, he announced. What's for breakfast? Eliza laughed, her heart light despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. How about pancakes? With syrup? If we have any left. Cole pumped his fist in the air and climbed onto one of the chairs, swinging his legs. Ivy appeared a moment later, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and Wade moved to the table, ruffling both children's hair as he passed. Eliza set to work mixing batter, and as she cooked, She caught Wade watching her with that same soft expression from the night before. She felt her cheeks warm, and when Ivy asked why she was smiling so much, she just shook her head and said she was happy. And it was the truth. The days that followed had a dreamlike quality to them. On the surface, nothing had changed. Eliza still cooked and cleaned and tended to the children. Wade still worked from dawn to dusk on the ranch. But underneath, everything was different. They stole moments when they could. A brief touch of hands as they passed in the hallway. A lingering glance across the dinner table. Late-night conversations in the kitchen after the twins had gone to bed, sitting close together and talking about everything and nothing. Eliza learned things about Wade she'd never known. That he'd wanted to be a teacher when he was young, before his father died and left him the ranch. That he played the harmonica, though he hadn't picked it up in years. That his favorite time of day was early morning, when the world was still quiet and full of possibility. Wade learned about her too. About the years she'd spent taking care of her ailing father, watching their money disappear into doctor's bills and failed business ventures. About the auction and the fear that had gripped her when she'd realized no one was coming to save her. About the quiet strength she'd found in herself when she'd decided to stop waiting for rescue and start fighting for her own survival. "You're the bravest person I know," Wade said one night, his fingers tracing patterns on the back of her hand. Eliza laughed softly. "I don't feel brave. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together." "That's what brave is," Wade said, "holding it together even when you're terrified." She looked at him, this man who'd paid a fortune to save her from a fate worse than the one she'd already endured, and felt something fierce and protective rise up in her chest. He'd given her everything: safety, purpose, a family, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure he never regretted it. Duh. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing with it longer days and warmer temperatures. The snow melted completely, revealing muddy fields and new green shoots pushing up through the earth. Wade threw himself into the work of the season, plowing fields, mending equipment, preparing for calving season. Eliza helped where she could, but her attention was increasingly drawn to the twins, who seemed to be growing up before her eyes. Ivy had taken to following Eliza everywhere, chattering nonstop about everything from the birds she'd seen that morning to the book she was reading to her dreams about traveling to the ocean someday. She had Sarah's smile, bright and infectious, and Eliza felt a pang every time she saw it. The girl deserved to know her mother was proud of her, that she was loved beyond measure. Cole was quieter, more reserved, but he was opening up in his own way. He'd started showing Eliza his carvings, small, intricate figures of animals and people that showed real talent. She praised his work honestly, and he ducked his head, pleased and embarrassed in equal measure. One afternoon, as they were working together in the garden, planting seeds for the summer vegetables, Cole said, "You're different from the other ladies Pa brought here." Eliza glanced at him, surprised. "How so?" "You don't treat us like we're broken." He dug his fingers into the soil, his expression thoughtful. "The others, they were always trying to fix us, telling us to stop being sad, to move on, to act normal. Like if we just tried hard enough, we could forget Ma ever existed." Eliza's chest tightened. "That's not fair to you, or to your mother's memory." "I know, that's why they didn't last." He looked up at her, his dark eyes serious. "But you let us be sad. You didn't try to make it go away." "Sadness isn't something you make go away," Eliza said softly. "It's something you learn to carry, and you don't have to carry it alone." Cole nodded slowly, and then he said, "I'm glad Pa brought you here." Eliza blinked back sudden tears. "Me too." They worked in comfortable silence after that, and when Wade came in from the fields that evening and saw the neat rows of planted seeds, he smiled in a way that made Eliza's heart sing. Oh, but not everything was perfect. There were moments when Eliza caught Wade staring into the distance. His expression haunted, and she knew he was thinking about Sarah. There were nights when one of the twins woke up crying from a nightmare, calling for their mother, and Eliza had to swallow her own hurt and comfort them as best she could. And there was the town. Wade had avoided Black Hollow for months, but eventually they ran out of supplies and had no choice but to make the trip. Eliza had dreaded it. The thought of going back to the place where she'd been auctioned off made her stomach churn. But Wade insisted she come with him. "I'm not leaving you here alone," he said firmly. "And besides, it's time people saw that you're part of this family." So she'd climbed into the wagon beside him, the twins bouncing excitedly in the back, and tried to ignore the knot of anxiety in her chest. The town looked the same as it had the day she'd left. Dusty streets, weathered buildings, men lounging on porches and eyeing strangers with suspicion. But this time, Eliza wasn't alone. She had Wade beside her, solid and steady, and the twins chattering happily behind them. They stopped at the general store first, and Eliza stayed close to Wade as they went inside. The shopkeeper, a round-faced woman named Mrs. Calloway, looked up from her ledger and did a double-take when she saw Eliza. "Well, I'll be," she said, her eyes wide. "Eliza Rowan, didn't expect to see you back here." "It's just Eliza now," Wade said before Eliza could respond. "She's with us." Mrs. Calloway's gaze flicked between them, calculating. "I see. How's that working out?" "Just fine," Wade said evenly. "We need flour, sugar, coffee, and whatever fabric you've got. The twins need new clothes." Mrs. Calloway nodded and started gathering supplies, but Eliza could feel the woman's eyes on her, judging, assessing. She lifted her chin and refused to look away. When they left the store, arms loaded with packages, Eliza caught sight of a familiar face across the street. Crenshaw, the red-faced man who'd bid against Wade at the auction, was leaning against a post. His eyes narrowed. Wade saw him too, and his hand found Eliza's, squeezing gently. "Ignore him." But Crenshaw wasn't content to be ignored. He pushed off the post and sauntered over, his grin mean and mocking. "Well, well, if it isn't the fancy rancher and his bought woman," he drawled. "How's that working out for you, Mercer? She worth the 500? Wade's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Watch your mouth, Crenshaw." "Or what? You gonna throw more money around?" Crenshaw's gaze slid to Eliza, and she felt her skin crawl. "Must be nice having a pretty thing like that warming your bed." Wade's fist connected with Crenshaw's jaw before Eliza even saw him move. The man stumbled backward, blood spurting from his split lip, and a crowd started to gather. "You keep her name out of your filthy mouth," Wade said, his voice low and dangerous. "You hear me?" Crenshaw spat blood into the dirt and straightened, his hand going to his belt where a knife gleamed. "You're going to regret that, Mercer." Eliza's heart pounded. She grabbed Wade's arm. "Wade, don't—" But before Crenshaw could draw the knife, the sheriff appeared, pushing through the crowd with an expression of pure annoyance. "That's enough," he barked. "Crenshaw, get out of here before I throw you in a cell. Mercer, take your family and go home." Crenshaw glared at Wade but backed off, disappearing into the crowd. Wade stood there for a moment, breathing hard, and then he turned to Eliza. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "I'm fine, are you?" "Yeah." He flexed his bruised knuckles and winced. "Let's get out of here." They loaded the supplies into the wagon and headed out of town, the twins unusually quiet in the back. Eliza sat beside Wade, her mind racing. The look in Crenshaw's eyes had been pure hatred, and she knew this wasn't over. That night, after the children were in bed, Wade sat at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey, staring at his swollen knuckles. Eliza brought him a damp cloth and gently cleaned the blood from his hand. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did." Wade looked at her, his eyes fierce. "I won't let anyone talk about you like that. Ever. He could have hurt you." "Let him try." Wade caught her hand and pulled her closer, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You're mine to protect, Eliza, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her, but instead it made her feel cherished, valued, loved. "I can protect myself," she said, but there was no heat in it. "I know you can, but you don't have to, not anymore." She leaned down and kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into it, and when they finally broke apart, Wade's eyes were dark with emotion. "Marry me," he said suddenly. Eliza froze. "What?" "Marry me." Wade stood, still holding her hand. "I know it's fast. I know we've only had a few weeks of this, but I don't want to wait. I don't want to keep pretending we're just employer and employee. I want everyone to know you're my wife, that you belong here, that your family. Eliza's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Wade, the children, I'll talk to them. Tonight. Right now, if you want. He cupped her face, his expression desperate and hopeful all at once. I love you, Eliza, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Say yes. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she nodded, unable to find words. Wade let out a shaky laugh and kissed her again, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, wrapped up in each other. Then a small voice from the doorway said, You're getting married? They sprang apart to find Ivy standing at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes wide. Cole was right behind her, looking equally shocked. Wade cleared his throat. Yes, I asked Eliza to marry me. Ivy's face crumpled, and she burst into tears. You can't replace Ma. I'm not replacing anyone, Wade said quickly, dropping to his knees in front of her. Sweetheart, your mother will always be your mother. Nothing will ever change that. But Eliza loves you. She loves all of us, and I love her. That doesn't mean I don't still love your ma. Then why are you marrying her? Ivy sobbed, and the pain in her voice broke Eliza's heart. Wade pulled Ivy into his arms, holding her tight. Because life goes on, baby, and your ma would want us to be happy. She'd want us to have a family again. We already have a family, Cole said, his voice hard. We don't need her. Eliza flinched, but Wade shook his head. We do need her. I need her. And whether you want to admit it or not, you need her too. She's been here for you every single day. She's taken care of you when you were sick. She's listened to you. She's fought for you. She's not trying to take your mother's place. She's making her own place. And you love her just as much as I do. Cole's jaw worked, and for a moment Eliza thought he was going to argue. But then his eyes filled with tears, and he looked away. I don't want to forget Ma, he said quietly. You won't, Eliza said, her voice thick. I promise you won't. We'll talk about her. We'll remember her. She'll always be part of this family. Ivy pulled back from Wade, her face red and blotchy. Do you really love us? More than anything, Eliza said. You and Cole are the best thing that's ever happened to me. Ivy stared at her for a long moment, and then she launched herself at Eliza, wrapping her thin arms around her waist. Cole hesitated, but then he joined them, and the four of them stood there in the kitchen, holding each other and crying. When they finally pulled apart, Ivy wiped her eyes and said, If you marry Pa, does that mean you'll be our ma too? Eliza's breath caught. Only if you want me to be. Ivy nodded slowly. I think I do. Cole didn't say anything, but he didn't pull away either, and Eliza knew that was as close to acceptance as she was going to get for now. Wade looked at her over the twins' heads, his eyes shining with tears, and mouthed, Thank you. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Wade wanted to get married as soon as possible, and Eliza found herself caught up in the rush of preparation. There was no time for a fancy wedding, no money for a new dress or a big celebration, but Eliza didn't care. All she wanted was to stand beside Wade and promise to love him for the rest of her life. They decided to hold the ceremony at the ranch, with just a few neighbors and the circuit preacher who passed through every few months. Eliza spent her days cleaning and cooking, preparing food for the small gathering, while the twins helped decorate the house with wildflowers they picked from the fields. Ivy threw herself into the preparations with an enthusiasm that bordered on manic, chattering nonstop about what Eliza should wear and how they should arrange the chairs and what kind of cake they should have. Cole was quieter, but he helped too, carving a small wooden heart that he shyly presented to Eliza the night before the wedding. For good luck, he said, not meeting her eyes. Eliza clutched it to her chest, tears pricking her eyes. Thank you, Cole. I'll treasure it. He nodded and hurried away, but not before she saw the faint smile on his lips. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the sky a brilliant blue. Eliza woke early, her stomach a tangle of nerves and excitement. She bathed and dressed in the only decent dress she owned, a simple blue cotton that Ivy had helped her alter to fit better. It wasn't fancy, but when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she felt beautiful. Ivy burst into the room just as Eliza was pinning up her hair, her face flushed with excitement. You look like a princess, Eliza laughed. I don't know about that. You do. Pa's going to cry when he sees you. Let's hope not, Eliza said, but her heart swelled with love for this fierce, sweet girl. Ivy helped her finish with her hair, weaving in a few wildflowers, and then they went downstairs together. The neighbors had started to arrive, a handful of families from nearby ranches, all of them curious and cautiously friendly. Wade stood near the makeshift altar they'd set up in the front yard, looking more nervous than Eliza had ever seen him. He wore a clean shirt and his best trousers, and his hair was slicked back neatly. When he saw her, his eyes widened, and Eliza saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. Ivy elbowed her and whispered, "Told you." The ceremony was simple and brief. The preacher spoke about commitment and love, about the sanctity of marriage and the responsibilities that came with it. Eliza barely heard him. All she could focus on was Wade's hand in hers, warm and steady, and the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. When it came time for the vows, Wade's voice was rough but clear. "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand by you for the rest of my life. You've brought light back into this house, and I will spend every day making sure you never regret choosing us." Eliza's own vows were simpler. "I promise to love you and your children with everything I have, to build a life with you, to stand beside you through whatever comes. You saved me, Wade, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift." The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Wade kissed her softly, reverently, as the small crowd erupted in applause. When they pulled apart, Eliza saw tears streaming down Ivy's face, but the girl was smiling, and Cole was grinning despite himself. They spent the rest of the day celebrating, eating the food Eliza had prepared and listening to neighbors share stories and offer advice. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Wade pulled Eliza aside. "Thank you," he said, his arms wrapped around her. "For what?" "For saying yes. For loving us. For being brave enough to take a chance on a broken man and his broken family." Eliza shook her head. "You're not broken. None of us are. We're just healing." Wade kissed her forehead. "I love you, Mrs. Mercer." The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Mercer. She was no longer Eliza Rowan, the girl who'd been sold at auction. She was Eliza Mercer, wife and mother, a woman with a family and a home and a future. She was finally, truly free. The celebration wound down as the stars came out, and the neighbors began to pack up and head home. The twins, exhausted from the excitement, were sent to bed, though Eliza could hear them whispering and giggling upstairs for a long time afterward. Wade and Eliza stood on the porch, watching the last wagon disappear into the darkness. The air was cool and sweet, filled with the scent of sage and wildflowers. "I can't believe this is real," Eliza said softly. "It's real." Wade pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "This is your life now. Our life." Eliza closed her eyes and let herself sink into the moment, into the warmth of his embrace and the steady beat of his heart. She'd been through hell to get here, sold, humiliated, forced into a life she hadn't chosen. But somehow, against all odds, she'd found something beautiful in the ashes. She'd found love. She'd found a family. She'd found herself. And she was never letting go. The morning after the wedding, Eliza woke to find Wade already gone from their bed, the sheets cool where he'd been lying. She stretched, feeling the pleasant ache of muscles unused to the intimacy they'd shared the night before, and smiled despite the flutter of nerves in her stomach. Everything had changed, and yet somehow, everything felt exactly right. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, expecting to find Wade in the kitchen or already out working. Instead, she found all three of them, Wade and both twins, sitting at the table with guilty expressions on their faces. "What's going on?" Eliza asked, her hand going to her throat. Ivy jumped up, nearly knocking over her chair. "We made you breakfast, but we kind of burned the eggs." Eliza looked at the table and had to press her lips together to keep from laughing. There were indeed eggs, charred black around the edges and swimming in grease. The bacon was somehow both raw in the middle and crispy on the ends. The biscuits looked like lumps of coal. "It was supposed to be a surprise," Cole muttered, his ears turning red. "A wedding present, kind of." Wade stood, running a hand through his hair. "We wanted to do something nice for you, since you're always taking care of us." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, and she crossed the room quickly, pulling all three of them into a fierce embrace. "This is the sweetest thing anyone has ever done for me." "Even though it's terrible?" Ivy asked, her voice muffled against Eliza's shoulder. Especially because it's terrible, Eliza said, laughing through her tears. Because you tried. Because you wanted to do something kind. That matters more than perfect eggs. Wade met her eyes over the twins' heads, and the look of pure love on his face made her knees weak. They'd built this together, this messy, imperfect, beautiful family, and she would protect it with everything she had. They ended up scraping the burnt eggs into the chicken bucket and making fresh breakfast together. All four of them crowded around the stove, laughing and bumping into each other. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. Chet. The weeks following the wedding settled into a new rhythm. Eliza was no longer the hired help or the woman Wade had bought at auction. She was his wife, the twins' stepmother, and the lady of the house. The change was subtle but profound, and she felt it in every interaction, every shared glance, every quiet moment. The neighbors who'd attended the wedding spread the word, and slowly, cautiously, the community began to accept her. Mrs. Calloway from the general store stopped looking at her with suspicion and started asking her opinion on fabric patterns. The nearby ranchers' wives invited her to a quilting circle, though Eliza suspected it was more curiosity than genuine friendship at first. Still, she went. She sat in Martha Henderson's parlor with 5 other women, her fingers clumsy on the needle as they worked on a wedding ring pattern quilt, and listened to them talk about their children, their husbands, the challenges of frontier life. They asked her questions too, careful, probing ones, and she answered as honestly as she could without revealing the shame she still carried about the auction. "It's good to see Wade happy again," Martha said, her weathered hands moving expertly over the fabric. "After Sarah died, we all thought he'd just give up. Stop living." "He came close," Eliza admitted quietly. "But the children needed him. That kept him going. And now he has you." Martha smiled, but there was a sharpness in her eyes. "You're good for him, for all of them. Just don't expect everyone in town to see it that way right off." Eliza's hand stilled on the quilt. "What do you mean?" Martha glanced at the other women, who suddenly became very interested in their stitching. "There's talk about how Wade bought you at that auction. Some folks think it's unseemly, that you married him out of obligation." Heat flooded Eliza's face. "I married him because I love him." "I know that, dear, but people like to gossip." Martha reached over and patted her hand. "Just hold your head high and give them nothing to whisper about. Eventually they'll find someone else to talk about." Eliza nodded, but the words stung. She'd hoped that the wedding would put an end to the speculation, that people would see her as Wade's wife instead of the girl who'd been sold. But she should have known better. The stain of that day in Black Hollow would follow her for a long time. When she got home that evening, Wade took one look at her face and pulled her aside. "What happened?" he asked, his thumb brushing over her cheek. She told him about the conversation, about the gossip, and watched his jaw tighten with anger. "I'll talk to them," he said. "I'll make them understand." "No." Eliza caught his hand. "That'll just make it worse. Martha said to give it time. And she's right. We just have to prove them wrong by living our lives." Wade searched her face. "You shouldn't have to prove anything to anyone." "Maybe not. But this is the world we live in." She managed a small smile. "Besides, I've dealt with worse than small-town gossip." He pulled her into his arms, and she breathed in the familiar scent of leather and sage and sunshine that clung to him. "I hate that you have to deal with this." "I can handle it," she said, "as long as I have you." Spring turned to summer, and the ranch came alive with new growth. The fields Wade had planted turned green, the cattle produced healthy calves, and the twins seemed to grow an inch every week. Eliza threw herself into the work of running the household, determined to prove, if only to herself, that she belonged here. She learned to make Sarah's recipes from the worn cookbook she found in the kitchen, and the first time she served Wade his late wife's cornbread, he'd gone very still, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Is it all right?" Eliza had asked, suddenly terrified she'd overstepped. "It's perfect," Wade said hoarsely. "Thank you for keeping her memory alive." The twins had looked at each other, and then Ivy reached over and squeezed Eliza's hand under the table. But not every day was easy. There were moments when Eliza caught Wade staring at Sarah's photograph on the mantel, his expression full of longing and grief. There were nights when Ivy woke up crying for her mother, and no amount of comfort from Eliza could quite fill that void. There were times when Cole shut down completely, retreating into silence for hours or even days. Eliza learned to navigate these moments with patience and grace, giving them space when they needed it and support when they asked for it. She never tried to compete with Sarah's memory, never suggested they put away her things or stop talking about her. Instead, she made room for Sarah in their lives, acknowledging that love didn't have to be finite, that there was space in their hearts for both the past and the present. One evening, as she was tucking Ivy into bed, the girl said, "I used to be scared that if I loved you, it meant I didn't love Ma anymore." Eliza's chest tightened. "And now? Now I know that's not true. Pa explained it to me. He said love isn't like bread, where if you give some away, you have less. It's like a candle. You can light other candles from it, and the first flame doesn't get any smaller." Eliza blinked back tears. "That's very wise." "I love you," Ivy said suddenly, fiercely. "I love you, and I love Ma, and it's okay to love both." Eliza pulled her close, her voice breaking. "I love you too, sweetheart. So much." When she left Ivy's room, she found Wade waiting in the hallway. He'd clearly been listening, and when he saw her tear-stained face, he pulled her into his arms. "You're doing an incredible job with them," he whispered. "I'm just trying not to mess them up," Eliza said, half laughing, half crying. "You could never." Wade pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're exactly what they need. What we all need." But the peace they'd built was fragile, and it didn't take much to threaten it. It happened on a sweltering day in late June. Wade had taken Cole into town to pick up supplies and get the boy fitted for new boots, leaving Eliza and Ivy at home to work in the garden. They'd spent the morning weeding and watering, and Eliza had just sent Ivy inside to get them both some water when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her stomach drop when she recognized the rider. Crenshaw. He pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the yard, his lip curling in a sneer when he saw her. The bruise Wade had given him weeks ago had faded, but the hatred in his eyes hadn't. Well, well. Mrs. Mercer. He said her new name like it was a curse. "All alone out here?" Eliza's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you want, Crenshaw?" "Just came to see how you're settling in. Must be nice, playing house with a man who paid good money for you." He swung down from his horse, and Eliza took an instinctive step back. "Tell me, does he make you work for your keep, or do you earn it on your back?" Rage flooded through her, hot and bright. "Get off this property, now!" "Or what? You gonna make me?" He took a step closer, and Eliza could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You think you're so high and mighty now, but we all know what you are. A whore who got lucky." Eliza heard the screen door bang open and turned to see Ivy standing on the porch, her face white with fear. "Eliza?" "Go back inside, Ivy," Eliza said, her voice sharp with command. "Right now." But Ivy didn't move, and Crenshaw's attention shifted to her. His eyes narrowed and a cruel smile spread across his face. "That one of Mercer's kids? Pretty little thing. Be a shame if something happened to her." Ice flooded Eliza's veins. She moved between Crenshaw and the porch, her hands clenching into fists. "You touch her, and I will kill you myself." Crenshaw laughed, but there was something uncertain in his eyes now. "Big talk for a woman." "Try me," Eliza said, and she meant every word. For a long moment, they stared at each other, and then Crenshaw spat into the dirt. "You ain't worth the trouble." He turned and swung back onto his horse. "But you tell your husband he better watch his back. And his family." He rode off, and Eliza stood frozen, her whole body shaking. When she finally turned back to the house, Ivy was crying. "Is he going to hurt us?" the girl asked, her voice small and terrified. Eliza climbed the porch steps and pulled Ivy into her arms. "No, I won't let him, I promise." But even as she said the words, fear gnawed at her. Crenshaw was dangerous, and he clearly had no intention of letting the insult at the auction go. She needed to tell Wade, needed to make sure they were prepared for whatever came next. When Wade and Cole returned that evening, Eliza pulled Wade aside and told him everything. She watched the color drain from his face, watched his hands curl into fists. "He came here? Threatened you and Ivy?" "Yes, but he left when I stood up to him." Wade's eyes were dark with fury. I'm going to kill him. No, you're not. Eliza grabbed his arm. That's exactly what he wants. He wants you to lose control, to do something that'll get you arrested or worse. We have to be smarter than that. He threatened my family, Wade said, his voice shaking. I can't just let that stand. I'm not saying we do nothing, but we have to think this through. Eliza took a deep breath. Maybe we should talk to the sheriff. Make it official. Wade shook his head. The sheriff won't do anything, not unless Crenshaw actually hurts someone. Then we protect ourselves. We keep the rifles loaded, we don't let the kids go anywhere alone, and we watch for trouble. Wade looked at her for a long moment, and then he pulled her close. I can't lose you, any of you. You won't, Eliza said fiercely. We're going to get through this, together. The next few weeks were tense. Wade barely slept, spending half the night patrolling the property with a rifle over his shoulder. Eliza kept the children close, never letting them out of her sight. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. The strain was wearing on all of them. Cole became sullen and withdrawn, snapping at Ivy over the smallest things. Ivy started having nightmares again, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. Wade's temper grew shorter, and Eliza found herself constantly on edge. One night, after yet another nightmare had woken the whole house, Eliza sat on the porch and let herself cry. She was exhausted, terrified, and beginning to wonder if they'd ever feel safe again. Wade found her there and sat down beside her, pulling her against his chest. I'm sorry, he said quietly. This is my fault. If I hadn't hit him. If you hadn't hit him, he'd still hate us, Eliza interrupted. Men like Crenshaw don't need a reason. They just need an excuse. Wade was quiet for a moment, and then he said, I talked to some of the other ranchers today. Asked them to keep an eye out, let me know if they see Crenshaw anywhere near our property. And? They agreed. Most of them can't stand him anyway. He's got a reputation for being mean and underhanded. Wade hesitated. They also said we should consider leaving for a while, going to stay with Martha and Tom Henderson until things cool down. Eliza stiffened. You want to run? I want to keep you safe. Running won't keep us safe. It'll just show Crenshaw that he's won, that he can scare us off our own land. Eliza pulled back to look at Wade. This is our home. We don't abandon it because of a bully. Wade's eyes searched hers. You're sure? I'm sure. He nodded slowly. Then we stay, but we stay smart. And if he shows his face here again, I won't hold back. I wouldn't expect you to, Eliza said. But the confrontation came 2 weeks later, on a night when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the world was dark as pitch. Eliza woke to the sound of the cattle lowing in distress, and she knew immediately that something was wrong. Wade was already out of bed, pulling on his boots and grabbing his rifle. Stay here with the kids. Lock the door. Wade, I mean it, Eliza, stay inside. But she couldn't just sit and wait. She threw on her robe and hurried to the twins' room, waking them quickly. Get dressed and stay quiet. Don't come out no matter what you hear. What's happening? Ivy asked, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know yet. Just do as I say. She left them scrambling for their clothes and went back to the bedroom, grabbing Wade's spare rifle from the closet. Her hands were shaking, but she checked to make sure it was loaded, then made her way downstairs. Through the window, she could see the barn. Flames were licking up the side of it, bright orange against the darkness, and her heart stopped. Fire. Someone had set fire to the barn. She ran outside, the rifle clutched in her hands, and found Wade already there with a bucket, trying desperately to douse the flames. The cattle were panicking, bellowing and slamming against the fence, and the heat was intense even from several feet away. The animals, Eliza shouted. We have to get them out. Wade nodded, his face streaked with soot and sweat. I'll handle the fire. You open the fence. Eliza ran to the gate and threw it open, then started herding the cattle away from the burning barn. They were terrified and uncooperative, but she managed to get most of them moving toward the far pasture. Behind her, she could hear Wade shouting, hear the hiss and crackle of the fire. And then she heard something else. Hoofbeats. She spun around just in time to see Crenshaw ride out of the darkness, a torch in his hand and a wild grin on his face. Thought you could ignore me? He shouted. Thought you could just go on playing happy family? Eliza raised the rifle, her hand steady despite the terror coursing through her. Get off our land, Crenshaw laughed. Or what? You gonna shoot me? I don't think so, sweetheart. Try me, Eliza said, and she pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, deliberately so, but it was close enough to make Crenshaw's horse rear in panic. He fought to control the animal, his face contorted with rage, and then Wade was there, his own rifle pointed straight at Crenshaw's chest. Next one won't miss, Wade said, his voice deadly calm. Get out! Now! For a long moment, Crenshaw just stared at them, and Eliza could see him weighing his options. Then he spat into the dirt and wheeled his horse around. This ain't over, he called over his shoulder, and then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Wade didn't lower his rifle until the sound of hoofbeats had completely faded. Then he turned to Eliza, his face gray with shock. You could have been killed, he said hoarsely. So could you. Eliza's legs suddenly felt like water, and she sat down hard on the ground. Is the barn? We got lucky. The fire didn't spread too far. We'll lose part of the roof, but the structure's sound. Wade knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. That was the bravest, most foolish thing I've ever seen. I wasn't going to let him burn down our home, Eliza said. And then the adrenaline finally wore off and she started to shake. Wade held her tightly, and they stayed like that until Cole and Ivy came running out of the house, both of them crying and terrified. Wade gathered them all close, and they sat together in the dirt, holding each other while the last of the flames died out. The next morning, Wade rode into town and reported everything to the sheriff. This time, with witnesses, 2 of the neighboring ranchers had seen Crenshaw riding toward the Mercer place with a torch. The sheriff had no choice but to act. Crenshaw was arrested, charged with arson and attempted murder, and locked in the town jail to await trial. When Wade came home and told Eliza the news, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. It's over, she said, hardly daring to believe it. It's over, Wade confirmed. He won't be bothering us again. The twins, who'd been listening from the doorway, let out simultaneous whoops of joy and ran to hug Wade. He caught them both, lifting them off the ground, and Eliza watched with tears in her eyes. They'd survived. They'd fought for their home, their family, their future, and they'd won. The weeks after Crenshaw's arrest were peaceful in a way Eliza had never experienced. The fear that had been hanging over them was gone. And in its absence, they all seemed to breathe easier. The twins laughed more, played harder, slept better. Wade's shoulders lost some of their tension, and he started smiling again, really smiling. And Eliza felt like she was finally, truly home. One evening, as they were all sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Ivy suddenly said, I'm glad you married, Pa. Eliza looked at her, surprised. You are? Yeah, at first I was mad. I thought you were trying to take Ma's place, but you're not. You're just you. Ivy smiled, a sweet, genuine smile. And I like you being here. Cole nodded. Me too. You're pretty cool for a grown-up. Wade laughed, and Eliza felt her eyes fill with happy tears. I like being here too. More than I can say. Then don't say it, Wade said, pulling her close. Just stay. Forever, Eliza promised. I'll stay forever. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Eliza knew that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for her whole life. Not just a home, not just a family, but a place where she belonged, where she was loved, where she was free to be herself. She'd been sold at auction for $500, but she'd gained something priceless. She'd gained everything. The promise of forever hung between them like something sacred, and as the last light faded from the sky, Eliza felt a completeness she'd never known was possible. But even in that perfect moment, she understood that forever wasn't just a word. It was work, choice, and courage, renewed each day. The trial came in August, when the heat pressed down on Black Hollow like a suffocating blanket and tempers ran short. The whole town turned out for it, packing into the small courthouse until there was barely room to breathe. Eliza sat in the front row with Wade on one side and Martha Henderson on the other, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. Crenshaw was brought in wearing shackles, his face twisted with rage and defiance. When his eyes found Eliza, she met his gaze without flinching, and she saw something flicker there, surprise maybe, that she hadn't been broken by his threats. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. The fire, the threats, the witnesses who'd seen Crenshaw riding toward the Mercer ranch with a torch. Wade testified, his voice steady and clear as he described what had happened that night. The neighboring ranchers confirmed what they'd seen, and then Eliza was called to the stand. She walked to the witness box with her head high, acutely aware of every eye in the room on her. The prosecutor asked her to describe the events leading up to the fire, and she did, her voice growing stronger with each word. "And when Mr. Crenshaw came to your home earlier that month, what did he say to you?" the prosecutor asked. Eliza's jaw tightened. "He called me names, vile names. He threatened me and my stepdaughter. He said my husband should watch his back." A murmur ran through the courtroom, and Crenshaw's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection! This is hearsay and irrelevant to the arson charge." "It establishes motive, Your Honor," the prosecutor countered. The judge, a gray-haired man with a stern expression, nodded. "Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Mercer." Eliza took a breath and went on. "He was angry that my husband had married me instead of letting him—" She stopped, choosing her words carefully. "Instead of letting him win the auction." "And by the auction, you mean the public sale, where your late father's debts were settled by selling you to the highest bidder." Shame burned through her, but Eliza kept her chin up. "Yes." "And your husband, Mr. Wade Mercer, outbid Mr. Crenshaw at that auction?" "Yes, he paid $500. The courtroom erupted in whispers, and the judge banged his gavel. "Order!" The prosecutor turned to face the jury. "So, Mr. Crenshaw's hatred of the Mercer family stems from losing a transaction he believed he deserved to win, and when that hatred couldn't be satisfied through intimidation, he resorted to arson and attempted murder. No further questions." Crenshaw's lawyer tried to paint Eliza as a liar and a manipulator, suggesting she'd seduced Wade into marriage for security and was now fabricating stories to punish Crenshaw. But Eliza didn't break. She answered every question calmly, truthfully, and when she finally stepped down from the stand, she felt Wade's hand squeeze hers as she passed. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. When they returned with a guilty verdict, Eliza felt the tension drain from her body. Crenshaw was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison, and as he was led away, screaming obscenities, Eliza allowed herself a small, fierce smile. It was truly over. Outside the courthouse, neighbors who'd once looked at her with suspicion now approached with congratulations and respect. Mrs. Calloway hugged her tightly and whispered, "You're stronger than iron, girl. Don't let anyone tell you different." Wade pulled her aside, his eyes shining. "You were incredible in there." "I just told the truth," Eliza said. "You stood up for yourself. For us. For our family." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm so damn proud of you." She kissed him, not caring who saw. And when they finally pulled apart, she found Ivy and Cole watching them with matching grins. "Can we go home now?" Cole asked. "This town's too crowded." Wade laughed. "Yeah, let's go home." Dum-dum. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, the kind that came after a storm had finally passed. The twins dozed in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the heat and the tension, and Eliza leaned against Wade's shoulder, watching the familiar landscape roll by. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked softly. "How different everything is from that first day," Eliza said. "When you brought me here, I was terrified. I thought I was just trading one prison for another. And now? Now I know this is the freest I've ever been." She looked up at him. "You gave me that. You and the children. You gave me a life." Wade's throat worked. "You gave us one too. We were just existing before you came, going through the motions. You made us whole again." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when the ranch finally came into view, Eliza felt her heart swell with love for this place. The house with its crooked shutters, the patched barn roof, the fields stretching out toward the mountains, it was all hers, all theirs, home. Fall arrived with crisp mornings and golden afternoons, and the ranch burst into activity. There was harvesting to do, cattle to move to winter pasture, endless preparations for the cold months ahead. But this year, there was joy in the work. The shadow of fear had lifted, and they all felt lighter, freer. Ivy turned 10 in September, and Eliza organized a small party with cake and presents and games. Martha Henderson and her family came, along with a few other neighboring children, and the house rang with laughter. Watching Ivy blow out her candles, her face glowing with happiness, Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "You all right?" Wade murmured, coming to stand beside her. "More than all right," Eliza said. "I'm just grateful for all of this." Cole's birthday followed 2 weeks later. The twins had been born on different days, a fact Cole never let Ivy forget. And they celebrated again, this time with a hunting trip that Wade and Cole had been planning for months. Eliza packed them food and watched them ride out at dawn, her heart full. When they returned that evening, Cole was practically bursting with pride. "I got a deer, Eliza. A 6-point buck. Pa said it was a perfect shot." Wade grinned and ruffled his son's hair. "The boy's a natural, better than I was at his age." They spent the evening processing the meat, and Eliza taught the twins how to cure venison properly, the way her father had taught her years ago. It was messy, hard work, but they did it together, and by the time they were done, Eliza's hands were raw and her back ached, but she was smiling. That night, after the children were in bed, Wade found her soaking her hands in warm water. "You didn't have to do all that yourself," he said, sitting beside her. "I could have handled it." "I wanted to," Eliza said. "I wanted to teach them, to pass something on." Wade took her hands from the water and dried them gently, then brought them to his lips. "You're an incredible mother, you know that?" The word stopped her. Mother. She'd been trying to earn that title for months, had fought for it, bled for it, but hearing Wade say it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. "They have a mother," Eliza said quietly. "They'll always have Sarah." "They have 2 mothers," Wade corrected. "One who gave them life, and one who's teaching them how to live it. There's room for both." Eliza's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned into him, letting him hold her while she cried. They were good tears, healing tears, the kind that washed away the last of her doubts. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in mid-October. But this time Eliza wasn't afraid. They were prepared, with a full larder and plenty of firewood and a house that felt warm, even when the temperature dropped below freezing. One evening, as they sat around the fire, Ivy suddenly looked up from the sock she was mending and said, "Eliza, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you ever think about having your own baby? With Pa?" The question caught Eliza completely off guard. She felt her face flush, and when she glanced at Wade, she saw that he looked equally stunned. I don't know," Eliza said carefully. "Your father and I haven't really talked about it." "But would you want to?" Ivy pressed. "Because I think it would be nice, to have a baby brother or sister." Cole looked up, interested now. "Yeah, that could be cool. As long as it's not annoying." Wade cleared his throat. "Kids, maybe this isn't—" "We're just asking," Ivy said innocently, "because you're married now, and married people have babies sometimes, right?" Eliza couldn't help but laugh at the earnest expressions on their faces. "That's true, but it's also something your father and I need to decide together." "So you'll think about it?" Ivy asked hopefully. "We'll think about it," Wade said, his eyes meeting Eliza's with a mixture of amusement and something deeper. "But right now it's time for bed, both of you." The twins groaned but obeyed, and after they'd trudged upstairs, Wade turned to Eliza with a sheepish expression. "Sorry about that. They've been reading too many romance novels from Martha's lending library." Eliza smiled. "It's all right. They're just excited about the future." "Are you?" Wade asked quietly. "Excited about the future, I mean. About everything that could come with it?" Eliza took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I am. Terrified, but excited. I never thought I'd have any of this. A husband, children, a home. The idea of having a baby, of bringing new life into this family. It's overwhelming, but in a good way." Wade pulled her close. "We don't have to decide anything right now. We have time, all the time in the world." But as it turned out, the decision was already being made for them. Sean. Eliza first suspected something was different in late November. She was more tired than usual. Her stomach was queasy in the mornings, and certain smells made her feel ill. She tried to ignore it, told herself it was just the stress of the past few months catching up with her. But when she missed her monthly course for the second time, she knew. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt, leaving her breathless and dizzy. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking, and tried to process what this meant. A baby. She was going to have Wade's baby. Fear and joy warred inside her. She'd never been a mother before, had no idea if she'd be any good at it. What if something went wrong? What if she lost the baby, the way so many women did out here on the frontier? What if Wade wasn't ready for this? But beneath the fear was a fierce primal happiness. A baby. A child of her own, born from love instead of obligation. A living symbol of everything she and Wade had built together. She kept the secret for a week, wanting to be absolutely certain before she told anyone. She watched the twins, studied the way they moved and talked and laughed, and tried to imagine a tiny version of Wade with her eyes, or a daughter with his stubborn chin. The images made her smile despite her nervousness. Finally, one evening when the twins were asleep and the house was quiet, she took Wade's hand and led him to their bedroom. "I need to tell you something," she said, her heart pounding. Wade's expression immediately shifted to concern. "What's wrong? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, better than fine, actually." She took a deep breath. "Wade, I'm pregnant." For a long moment he just stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then his eyes widened and a slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. We're going to have a baby?" "Yes," Eliza said, laughing through her tears. "We're going to have a baby." Wade let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he finally set her down, his eyes were wet. "I can't believe it," he said, his voice rough. After Sarah, I thought I'd never have this again. Never feel this kind of happiness." "Are you happy?" Eliza asked, suddenly needing to hear him say it. "Happy?" Wade cupped her face in his hands, his expression so full of love it took her breath away. "Eliza, I'm over the moon. You're giving me the greatest gift I could ever ask for." He kissed her then, soft and reverent, and Eliza felt the last of her fear melt away. They would face this together, just like they'd faced everything else. Telling the twins was both easier and harder than Eliza had expected. They gathered them in the living room the next morning, and Wade delivered the news with a grin that wouldn't quit. "Eliza and I have something to tell you. In about 7 months, you're going to have a baby brother or sister." Ivy shrieked and threw her arms around Eliza. I knew it! This is the best thing ever." Cole looked stunned. "Really? We're getting a baby?" "Really?" Eliza confirmed, laughing as Ivy squeezed her tight enough to hurt. "Can we name it?" Ivy asked, bouncing on her toes. "Please? I have so many good ideas." "We'll see," Wade said diplomatically. "But first, we have to wait for the baby to actually get here." "That's forever away," Ivy groaned, but she was still grinning. Cole came over and hugged Eliza awkwardly, his ears turning red. "Congratulations," he mumbled. "I hope it's a boy. Girls are annoying." "Hey!" Ivy swatted at him, and just like that, they were wrestling on the floor, their laughter filling the house. Wade pulled Eliza close, and they watched their children, their family, with matching smiles. Everything was coming together, piece by piece, into something beautiful and whole. The winter months passed in a blur of preparation. Eliza knitted baby clothes by the fire, while Ivy chattered about names, and Cole pretended not to be excited but kept asking questions about what babies needed. Wade converted the small storage room off their bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands and carving tiny animals to hang above it. The neighbors rallied around them too. Martha Henderson organized a quilting bee specifically to make blankets for the baby, and the other ranch wives brought over hand-me-down clothes and advice. Even Mrs. Calloway from the general store softened, offering Eliza a discount on fabric and congratulating her warmly. "You've made quite a life for yourself," Mrs. Calloway said as she wrapped up Eliza's purchases. "I'll admit, I had my doubts at first, but you've proven yourself 100 times over." Eliza felt a flush of pride. "Thank you. That means a lot." "You're one of us now," Mrs. Calloway said simply. "And we take care of our own." When Eliza told Wade about the conversation that evening, he pulled her into his arms and said, "I told you, you belong here. You always have." Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Eliza's belly had grown round and prominent, and she moved more slowly now, her body heavy with the weight of the life she carried. The twins were fascinated by the baby, pressing their hands against her stomach to feel it kick and arguing over whether it would be a boy or a girl. "It's definitely a boy," Cole insisted. "I can tell." "You can't tell anything," Ivy shot back. "It's going to be a girl, and she's going to be beautiful and smart and nothing like you." Wade and Eliza exchanged amused glances over their heads. These arguments had become a daily occurrence, and neither of them had the heart to stop them. One warm afternoon in early May, Eliza was hanging laundry when she felt the first contraction. It was mild, barely more than a tightening across her belly, but she knew what it meant. The baby was coming. She made her way inside, moving carefully, and found Wade in the barn. "It's time," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. Wade's face went white. "Time? Now? But it's not supposed to be for another 2 weeks." "Babies don't follow schedules," Eliza said, managing a smile despite the fear creeping in. "We need to get ready." Wade sprang into action, sending Cole to fetch Martha Henderson and Ivy to boil water and gather clean towels. He helped Eliza to their bedroom, his hands shaking, and stayed by her side as the contractions grew stronger. Martha arrived within the hour, calm and capable, and took charge immediately. "Wade, you go keep those children occupied. Eliza, you're doing fine. Just breathe through it." The labor was long and hard, stretching through the afternoon and into the evening. Eliza gritted her teeth through the pain, focusing on Martha's steady voice and the thought of the baby she would soon hold. Wade checked on her between contractions, his face lined with worry, and she squeezed his hand tightly. "I'm all right," she gasped. "Just stay close." "I'm not going anywhere," Wade promised. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the room in shades of gold, Eliza gave one last tremendous push, and a baby's cry filled the air. "It's a girl," Martha announced, tears streaming down her weathered face. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Eliza collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and overwhelmed, and Martha placed the tiny, squalling bundle in her arms. Eliza looked down at her daughter, and felt her heart crack open with love. The baby had a shock of dark hair and Wade's strong chin, but her eyes, when they finally opened, were the same warm brown as Eliza's own. She was perfect, absolutely perfect. Wade came in then, his face streaked with tears, and knelt beside the bed. "She's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand, just like her mother. "We need a name," Eliza said, unable to look away from her daughter's face. Wade was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What about Hope? Because that's what she is. Hope for the future." Eliza felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Hope Mercer, it's perfect." The door burst open, and Ivy and Cole rushed in, their eyes wide with wonder. "Is that her?" Ivy breathed. "Is that our sister?" "Come meet Hope," Eliza said, shifting so the twins could see. They crowded around the bed, staring at the baby with matching expressions of awe. Ivy reached out and gently touched Hope's tiny fist, and when the baby's fingers curled around hers, the girl let out a sob of joy. "She's holding my hand," Ivy whispered. "She knows I'm her sister." Cole was quieter, but his eyes were shining. "She's really small." "Are all babies this small?" "You were even smaller," Wade said, ruffling his hair. "Both of you were." They stayed like that for a long time, all 5 of them crowded together on the bed, watching Hope sleep. And Eliza looked around at her family, at Wade's proud, tear-stained face, at Ivy's gentle wonder, at Cole's protective expression, and knew that she had everything she'd ever wanted. She'd been sold at an auction for $500, treated like property, stripped of her dignity and her choices. But from those ashes, she'd built a life that was entirely her own. She'd fought for it, earned it, and now she would protect it with everything she had. The months that followed were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Hope was a fussy baby, demanding constant attention, but Ivy and Cole rose to the challenge, helping with feedings and diaper changes and entertaining their sister with songs and stories. Wade was a doting father, spending every spare moment with Hope, and Eliza watched him fall in love with their daughter all over again each day. The ranch prospered too. The harvest was abundant, the cattle multiplied, and slowly they began to build a nest egg for the future. Wade talked about expanding, adding more land, maybe even building a bigger house someday. Eliza listened to his dreams and added her own, and together they planned for a future that seemed limitless. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with Hope, asleep in Eliza's arms, Ivy suddenly said, "I'm glad you came here." Eliza looked at her, surprised. "You are?" "Yeah, at first I hated you. I thought you were trying to steal Pa and take Ma's place. But you didn't. You made your own place. And now I can't imagine life without you." Ivy smiled, a soft, genuine smile. "You're my Ma too, you know. Not instead of my first Ma, but in addition to her." Eliza's throat tightened. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." Cole nodded. "Yeah, what she said." "You're all right, Eliza." "High praise from you," Eliza teased, and Cole grinned. Wade wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We're all pretty lucky, aren't we?" "The luckiest," Eliza agreed, looking around at her family. "The absolute luckiest." 2 years passed, and the Mercer Ranch became known throughout the territory as one of the most successful homesteads in the region. But more than that, it became known as a place of warmth and welcome, where travelers could find a hot meal and a safe place to rest, where neighbors knew they could count on help in hard times. Eliza's reputation grew too. She became known as a healer, using the knowledge she'd gained nursing the twins through their fevers to help others in the community. She delivered babies, tended to the sick, and offered comfort to those who were grieving. People stopped seeing her as the girl who'd been sold at auction and started seeing her as Mrs. Mercer, a pillar of the community. Hope grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed her older siblings everywhere, chattering nonstop in a mixture of real words and gibberish. Ivy doted on her, teaching her songs and games, while Cole appointed himself her protector, watching over her with a fierce dedication that made Eliza's heart swell. And Wade looked at Eliza every day like she was the most precious thing in the world. They'd added 2 more children to their family, another daughter named Grace and a son named Thomas, and their house was always full of noise and chaos and laughter. One spring morning, Eliza stood on the porch and looked out at the land that had become hers. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the air smelled of sage and new growth. Behind her, she could hear the children waking up, their voices mingling with Wade's deeper tones. This was her life. This messy, beautiful, hard-won life. She'd been broken and rebuilt, sold and saved, lost and found. And through it all, she'd discovered something she'd never known she possessed: strength. Not the kind that came from never falling, but the kind that came from getting back up, again and again, until you finally found solid ground. She'd found that ground here, on this ranch, with this family, and she would never take it for granted. Wade came out onto the porch, Hope perched on his hip, and Grace toddling along beside him. He wrapped his free arm around Eliza and kissed her temple. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come," Eliza said. "How different everything is from that first day." "Best $500 I ever spent," Wade said with a grin. Eliza elbowed him gently. "You're terrible." "You love me anyway." "I do," she said, turning to face him. "I really, really do." He kissed her, soft and sweet, and Hope giggled and squirmed between them. From inside the house, Ivy called out that breakfast was ready, and Cole complained loudly that Ivy had burned the bacon again. It was chaos. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was everything. Eliza took Wade's hand and led her family inside, and as she looked around at the faces she loved more than anything in the world, she knew that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. She'd found home, she'd found love, she'd found herself, and she was never, ever letting go.